So, a question that I have been wrestling with for the last month or so is this. If I got everything I ever wanted in life, everything, what would that get me? I want you to think about this. If you were to give full vent to everything you desired, to everything within your personality, all of your passions, to everything in your upbringing, whatever is deep within you, if you were to just unleash that and get everything that you wanted, got exactly what you wanted, who would you be? What would that get you? It's not an easy question. Solomon pretty much sums it up when he says in Proverbs 25, the purposes, the desires, the motivations is the word there. The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. So a few years back, I got to go to southern Africa to Malawi, and Malawi is bordered by Lake Malawi, this fantastic lake, just fantastic. It's funny, I'd never heard of it till I was going there, and then I see it. It's just this enormous lake, and there's three things that it's really famous for. One is biodiversity. It is the most diverse lake, has the most diverse fish population of any lake in the world. It's crazy. They're always discovering these new fish there. The second thing it's famous for is they have these ginormous catfish. Over 5 feet long is how big catfish can go. It's just freaky. And then the third thing they're famous for is its depth. It is over half a mile deep. If you drop your cell phone, you don't go after it, right? And Solomon says that is what the human heart is like. That no matter how deep you go, there always seems to be a new depth to discover, another mystery that you don't even have a name for, and some monster lurking in the deep that you've only seen in nightmares. So today we come to Judges 8 and 9, and this is, if you remember, the book of Judges is X-shaped, and this is the breaking point, where it goes from one side to the next. This is the point in which everything that was so tenuously held together in the last 7 chapters starts rattling apart, and the people of God begin to self-destruct. This is the second half of the Gideon story. And in this part of the Gideon story, the first part about doubt, the second part, the narrator is going to invite us to look into the depths, to go under the surface, to plumb the depths of Gideon's desire and our desires. To pay attention to what's happening in Gideon's heart and to the depths, the recesses, what might be lurking in the deep, so that we might learn to pay attention to what's happening in our own hearts. And it's a story that forces us to ask the question that I've been pondering for the last month. If I got everything I wanted in life, what would that get me? Where would my desires lead me? Do I even know? Do I even want to know? So our text is Judges chapter 8. If you have a Bible, I would encourage you to turn there. We're going to go kind of line by line through 8, and then I'm just going to summarize chapter 9 here. So last week we saw Gideon the coward. He was hiding in the wine press, and then he became Gideon the doubter, who God gave him proof after proof after proof, and he kept doubting God, kept questioning him. He finally becomes Gideon the mighty warrior. Right? At the end of the story, he miraculously beats the unbeatable enemy. And just before we get to this epic battle scene where he and his 300 men are going to somehow take on the tens of thousands of Midianites and Eastern peoples, we get this one phrase, though, right towards the end, right before he goes into the battle, that got caught in our throat. And he said, now when we shout, we're going to say, for the Lord and for Gideon. And we're like, for Gideon? What in the story so far suggests that this has anything to do with Gideon? There's nothing of Gideon in this. It is God's strength and God's proof and God's miracle. God forced Gideon to get to this point, and now suddenly, right before the victory, he turns on it and says, no, this is for the Lord and for me. It seems odd. Whatever the case may be, though, his 300 men go on, rout the tens of thousands of Midianites, chop off the heads of their generals, Wolf and Raven. How cool is that? But then it turns out that the Midianite kings in this small contingency, they're still running off. They still make it make it, and they're headed home. They're on the chase. So we pick it up in verse 4 here. Judges chapter 8, starting in verse 4. Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted, yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. And this is an important geographic point, but it's also an important turning point in the text. The commentator Daniel Block points out that when he crosses the Jordan, this is signaling an important shift. Gideon is no longer going to fight to liberate God's people from foreign oppressors. He is now on a personal crusade to make sure that every last Midianite pays for what they've done. So this is the scene in the movie where the good guy, the hero, goes from like defending people to he turns dark and looks at everyone and says to the bad guy, I'm coming for you. There's no place on planet Earth where you're going to be safe. That's the point Gideon just got to. But his men are running out of supplies, so we see in verse 5. He said to the men of Sukkot, give my troops some bread. They are worn out, and I'm still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. He's like, hey, I'm on this rampage to stamp out every last Midianite, but I need help. I need your bread. And the officials are like, no thanks. Verse 6. But the officials of Sukkot said, do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops? Like, if we help you out on this one, and you don't succeed, they're going to come back and kill us. Why should we help you? Then Gideon replied, just for that, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hands, I will tear your flesh with thorns, desert thorns and briars. When I come back successful, and I will, I'm going to beat your hide with thorns. That's how that reads. Now, something just happened in the text that I don't want to pass over. Something that's fairly significant and that we could easily overlook, and it's that Gideon just invoked the name of the Lord. See the Lord in all caps there. In English, when you see the Lord in all caps, we know that that's referring to, in Hebrew, the sacred name, the personal name of God, which is revealed in the burning bush, Yahweh, I am that I am. That's the name of the Lord, the personal name of the Lord, as opposed to the generic name, the title, God, which could be, God could refer to a god of Midian or the Canaanite gods or an Egyptian god. It's just a title. But Yahweh, there's only one Yahweh. So up to this point in the book of Judges, God's name has played prominently in the book, which suggests that whatever's been going on, good, bad, ugly, and we know a lot of this has been ugly up to this point, whatever's been going on in the text, it has been done with the Lord, in an intimate personal relationship with God. They've been referring to him. They're on a first name basis with God. But starting in chapter 8, there's a shift. After they cross over the Jordan, there's a shift. In chapter 8, the Lord, all caps, occurs 3 times. Once here to threaten some people with a beating. Once to curse at someone. And once in a very pious sounding but completely fake religious declaration. In chapter 9, the name of the Lord, Yahweh, does not occur not once. So here's the clue that I want you to dial your mind into here. Here's the clue that something might be off in your relationship with God. When the only time you ever mention God is to threaten someone, curse at someone, or pretend to be religious, things between you and God probably aren't good. Which forces us to ask the question, how often do you personally address God during your day? How often do you recognize that he is with you in the good and the bad and the ugly? And what does that say about your relationship with him? Verse 8. From there, he went up to Peniel and made the same request of them for help. But they answered as the men of Sukkot had. So he said to the men of Peniel, when I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower. So Same thing as Sukkot, except Gideon cranks up the threats a few notches. And now here, it might be worth mentioning, in a book filled with significant names. You remember Deborah the bee and Jael the goat? Like, significance of names is littered throughout this text. In a book filled with double meanings of names, it's important to notice these two towns. The first is Sukkot, which literally means tents or shelters. It's where Jacob had gone and built a shelter, so they call it shelters. But it also happens to be the name of the last and greatest feast of the Jewish festival series. So at the end of the year, at the harvest, they would have this huge celebration. All God's people would come live in tents around Jerusalem and celebrate the Lord for 7 days. Now, this festival of feasting and dancing and resting in God's presence becomes, for the Jews and for Christians, a picture of something. A picture of a day when someday God will finish the harvest. He will harvest his people like wheat. He will bring them to himself to celebrate in his presence, rest in his presence forever and ever and ever. It becomes a picture of eternal life, of heaven, of the kingdom of God. When we get a glimpse of heaven in the book of Revelation, John regularly uses Sukkot imagery to describe what he sees of the people there. So, Sukkot Peniel literally means the face of God. It's the place where Jacob went in the book of Genesis, and he wrestled with a man all night long, and then the man touched his hip and dislocated it, and he walks away limping, but with a blessing. And he realizes, I didn't just wrestle with a man, I wrestled with God. I've seen the very face of God, and I've left with a blessing. So the face of God is a sign of acceptance, of love, of intimacy, of blessing, that God is willing to enter into conflict with me. So the face of God is most famously heard in this blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and give you peace. The Lord turn his face toward you. Numbers chapter 6, right? That's the sense of Peniel. Now notice how the narrator here is lathering on irony. So where does Gideon go? He goes to Sukkot. He goes to this place that is like the pinnacle, the name of heaven, the name of the kingdom of God, the name of final resting place. And he goes to Peniel, this place of intimacy, of blessing. And Gideon, on a mission from God, just threatened to destroy God's kingdom. He goes to heaven and says, I'm going to make it a personal hell. On a mission from God to save God's people, he just threatened to damn God's people. Do you get the irony building here? Now, you don't have to be an expert in ancient Hebrew or an expert in human psychology to know something's wrong in Gideon's soul. Gideon is ready to humiliate and destroy anyone or anything that gets in his way. And I'm guessing that this is not the behavior of someone who is at peace with God, self, and others. I'm just guessing. So, in verses 10 through 15, then, they catch the enemy, rout the entire army, capture the kings, and then they head back to Sukkot and Peniel. And we read in verse 16, he took the elders of the town and taught the men of Sukkot a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. He also pulled down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the town. Gideon lives up to his name. I don't know if you remember, but his name literally means hacker, like someone to hack something to pieces. And in Judges chapter 6, he hacked to pieces the idolatrous altar and the pole, Asherah pole, and burnt them up. And here, he hacks God's people to pieces. And we're like, Gideon, brother, what's going on here? Are you okay? Do you realize you've already won? Why are you killing all the men of the town? But then in verse 18, we get a deeper clue. We go a little deeper with Gideon. Then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of men did you kill at Tabor? Men like you, they answered, each one with the bearing of a prince. Gideon replied, those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. And with that, this whole text starts to make sense. His violent threats, they start to make sense. His doubts, they start to make sense because you see, while God gave Gideon a great victory for the people of God, it came at an immense personal cost. His own family got killed. That while God promised to save his people, he never promised to save Gideon's family. You know, there are things in life we just assume, like just assume that I'll live to be 80 or 90, or at least outlive my kids. I assume that if I'm fairly generous and responsible with my money, I'll have enough. I assume that marriage really means till death do us part. I assume that if I raise my kids and I pray for them and I take them to church and we have time together in the Word, that someday they're going to love God and they're going to grow up in the faith. We all have things we assume. Gideon, it's safe to say, assumed that if he risked his life to save the people of God, that God would save his family. But what happens when our assumptions get shattered? What happens when life doesn't work out the way it's supposed to? What happens when God himself shatters our assumptions? So can you trust a God who might let your family die? Do you want to serve God's family if it might mean losing your own? Do you really want God's kingdom if it means the destruction of your own kingdom? So I don't want to pretend like these are easy questions or that I can answer them for you. Eventually, if you live long enough, I do have an encouragement to you. You will have to face these questions, period. Your assumptions about yourself, about God, about how the universe works will get shattered. You will have to question everything you knew about God, yourself, and life. And for some, this will be catastrophic. You may never again believe in God. Your faith might be shattered. But for others, this is the start of a new journey. You will walk away limping, broken, but blessed. God uses the crisis to lead you to a depth of richness, of fullness that you never could have known if you hadn't gone through it. It's going to shape you. Either way, one way or the other, when your assumptions get shattered, you do not come away the same person. But how that looks on the other side is between you and God. Now, I'm not sure Gideon has the self-awareness at this moment to realize that he's being changed, that his assumptions are being shattered. But let's follow on the second half of 19 and see what he does. He says, "As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you." Turning to Jether, his oldest son, he said, "Kill them!" But Jether did not draw his sword because he was only a boy and was afraid. So Gideon, so intent on humiliating his enemies who had done something so hurtful to him, actually hurts his son, humiliates his son. Verse 21, Zebah and Zalmunna say, "Come, do it yourself. As the man is, so is his strength." So Gideon stepped forward and killed them and took the ornaments off their camel's neck. And the hacker hacks these two kings to pieces. And at this point in the story, we see on top of the water the waves sloshing. We know something's going on, but you have to wonder what's happening deep inside, deep underneath in the depths of Gideon's heart. Does Gideon even know right now? So on the one hand, God miraculously gave him victory, like this amazing victory over the Midianites. But Gideon then went and turned heaven into hell, the place of God's blessing into a curse. God gave him proof after proof that yes, he's with him. Yes, he's with him, but how can he trust a God who would let his brothers die? God gave him victory at every turn, but why, then, we ask, does this text at this point feel so utterly defeating? Now, I personally love this text. Not because it's pleasant or chipper or cheer, because it's so real. Like, this is life. This is what it's really like. Even in the midst of our greatest victories, it is mixed with these dark things brewing under the surface, with these past pains, with doubt, with struggles. Now, if it were up to me, at this point in the text, I would call a timeout, and I'd say, Gideon, here's what you need to do. We're going to send you for 2 weeks to Marble, Colorado. There's an excellent retreat center there, intensive counseling, 2 weeks. That's exactly what you need. You need someone to dig into your soul and help you sort this thing out. Or maybe go to a spiritual director. I know another one in Colorado. You should go there. You need to deal with your junk. That right now there is so much going on under the surface. You have to deal with it. But the Israelites, they have a different idea. Verse 22. The Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son and grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian." They overlook his doubts, the fact that he killed all the men of a city, the way he humiliates and destroys anyone who gets in his way. They say, "But you beat the Midianites, become our king," just like Moses predicted. So Moses had predicted this in Deuteronomy chapter 17. He said, someday you're going to want a king, but be careful. Don't just choose who's popular, who you want. Make sure you choose the man of the Lord's choosing. Make sure he knows his Bible through and through. Make sure he doesn't accumulate a bunch of gold or marry a bunch of wives the way other kings do. Or, and I quote, "his heart will be led astray." Now Gideon, if you know anything about him, he's not a Bible scholar, but he knows enough to get the right answer here. When they say, "Become our king," Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." No, not me. I couldn't become your king. That's the wrong answer. I learned this in Sunday school. God alone is our king. He's in control. He must be in control of your life as well. Now at this point, who knows? Gideon might actually mean this, but his actions suggest something different here. Listen to this. Verse 24, and he said, "I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder." It was a custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. So they answered, "We'll be glad to give you them." So they spread out a garment, and each of them threw a ring of it from his plunder onto it. And the weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, which is 43 pounds of gold, not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on the camels' necks. Gideon says, no, listen guys, I don't want to be a king. God alone is king. I just want to be fabulously wealthy and walk around in like royal robes. And I want those ornaments for my camels' necks, which is the ancient Near Eastern equivalent of flying around in Air Force One. I don't want to be a king. I just want to wear a king's outfit and live in a king's palace and have a king's ransom and fly in a king's jet. Verse 27. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed at Ophrah, his town, and the Israelites prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Then with all of his wealth, Gideon now takes his wealth and does exactly what kings in the ancient Near East, kings in Canaan, would have done. He sets up a place of worship in his hometown next to his palace. He makes a capital. And the ephod is something that the Israelites, they would use to hear from God. It was officially, there was one ephod that was supposed to be worn only by the high priest. And it was something that they wear like a breastplate type thing. And they think that this was used somehow for discerning the mind of God or getting a yes or no type of answer. Where is God leading us? Gideon, it's only supposed to be one ephod for the high priest of Israel, but Gideon goes ahead and makes one for himself so that he can control access to God, so that people have to come to him if they want to hear from God. Thus, Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace for 40 years. Jerubbaal, or Baal, that's Gideon's nickname, son of Joash, went back home to live. He had 70 sons of his own, for he had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son, whom he named Abimelech. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Jehoash in Ophrah of the Abiezerites. So he says, no. I don't want to be king. God alone is king. But I do want, the wealth of a king, the robes of a king, the symbols of a king on my personal camels, I do want to control access to God the way other kings do. And I do want to have a harem of women the way other kings do. And I want to have 70 sons the way Canaanite kings do. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention, I'm going to name my son Abimelech, which means my father, the king. So with his lips, he says, I don't want to be king. But everything in his life says, I'm your king. Now, for whatever reason, God is gracious to Gideon. He lets him say one thing and do another thing for 40 years, his whole life. He is a living, breathing contradiction. And yet God does not let Gideon's blatant contradictory life collapse upon itself. He doesn't let him self-destruct the way he does with others in this book. He doesn't expose his faults. He lets Gideon live his fake life until the day he dies. Now, whether that is God's kindness or God's judgment on Gideon, I'm going to let you decide. Whatever the case may be, Gideon doesn't have to face the crisis the people of God do. Gideon doesn't have to face the fallout his sons do. Chapter 9, which I'll summarize for time's sake, the narrator pauses the story, and if you know, up to this point, we've been going through these cycles of sin, cycle after cycle after cycle, and we're ready. Gideon's dead, ready for the next cycle, but the cycle doesn't come. There's no new cycle that starts up. He wants us to pause the story right here, and he wants us to hear the rest of Gideon's story, the story after the story. So, okay, nothing came in Gideon's life, but what then came of Gideon's life? What was the fruit of Gideon getting everything that he wanted in life, of all of his desires being fully vented in his life? Everything he sought, everything he wanted, he got it. What came of that? What happens when Gideon gets the victory, gets the revenge, gets the riches, gets the palace, gets the wives, gets the sons, gets the kingdom that his heart so desires, even if his lips won't admit it? And this is where we meet Abimelech. His name literally means my father is king. Gideon might have tried to hide his selfish desires in religious language, but when it comes to Abimelech, he just admits it. Nope, I really want to be king. Make me king. And like his dad, Abimelech will kill anyone who gets in his way. So Abimelech follows through and it follows his every desire. He wants to be king, and he gets everything he wants. He executes his brothers, hires what's called reckless scoundrels, which sound like a bad lot of guys, to become his personal army, and he makes himself king. And the people of Shechem, where he's at, they get everything they want too. They want a king from among their own. They want a king of the Shechemites, and Abimelech is a Shechemite. So they're like, yes, we have what we want, and everyone gets exactly what they want. And the first half of chapter 9, and it starts to sound like the American dream, right? Everybody gets what they want, but then things turn south. Abimelech starts feeling threatened. And he's like, how dare someone threaten my throne? So he goes out and he kills everybody. By which I mean everybody. And those he doesn't get to kill, they all run into this tower to escape from his wrath. And he sees them all locked up in this tower, men, women, and children, like about 1,000 people. And he goes out to the woods and starts chopping down wood, and he stacks up firewood on the outside, and he burns them alive. And then, not being a man of moderation, he decides, hey, we're on a roll. Let's go to the next town and do the same thing. All the people run into the tower. They start stacking up firewood. He comes, lays a log on it, but some woman at the top of the tower heaves a millstone off the top, and it comes down and cracks him on the head. And he dies a humiliating death. So for the people of Shechem, getting exactly what they wanted led them to be burned alive in their own tower by their own king. For Abimelech, getting exactly what he wanted led him to be a moral monster who had to be put down before he destroyed everyone and everything. So what was hidden in the father's heart comes to the surface in the son's heart. The doubt of the father becomes the open unbelief of the son. The burning anger inside the father becomes an open flame, literally, in the son. The implied rejection of God's kingship in this life of the father becomes open rejection of God's kingship in the son. That is how Gideon's story really ends. When everything within Gideon's heart is fully surfaced, when he gets everything he wants in life, he manages to survive, but he wrecks the lives of everyone around him and leaves a legacy of unbelief, violence, and death, which forces us to ask the uncomfortable question: what would it be like if I got everything I wanted? Not what I say I want, but what I really want. You know, if you grew up in church, you're like Gideon. You know the right answer, right? We want Jesus to be king. We know the right answer. We know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Seek first the kingdom. All these things will be added to you. We pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. We know the right answers. I don't want to be king. We want God to be king. And I don't say this mockingly. This really, really is the right answer. I really do believe that if we desired God and his kingdom first, that it would take care of everything, that it would lead us to Sukkot, to the place of celebrating his kingdom, living in his presence forever and ever, that it would lead us to Peniel, to the very face of God, to walk in blessing with him, to see him face to face. That's what we should want. But as Gideon so helpfully points out, saying you want God to be your king, and living like you want God to be your king, those are two different things. So if someone audited your life, we're talking about doing a financial audit here at GVF just to make sure all of our systems are in place and make sure we are above reproach in every way financially. If we did that type of audit with your life, if someone could go in and pay attention to how you use your time on the internet and how you use your finances and all your energy and even go into your thoughts and desires and those types of things, if they could audit everything in your life, would it show that you're seeking your kingdom or God's kingdom? If you don't have a church background or this whole thing is new to you, this probably sounds really crazy. Like, I didn't even know I was supposed to want God to be my king. Like, what does that even mean? Like, why would I want anyone to rule over my life, even God? Like, of course, I want to have control of my own life. And that is a good question. It really is a good question. It's a real question. And it's made even harder when we put it in the context of Gideon. Why would I want God to be king of my life when he might not give me what I want? Why would I want God to be king of my life when he might let my family die as I serve his mission? Admittedly, this is a terrifying question. It's a difficult question. Letting go, giving up control to God, trusting him when you don't know what he's going to do, it is hard. And anyone who tells you giving your life to Jesus is easy is lying to you. It's simple, but it's not easy. It'll cost you everything. The good news is that God is not a king like Gideon or Abimelech. God's king is Jesus. And he is gentle. And he is humble in spirit. And he doesn't chase after wives and power and political structures. He doesn't look for armies. And he doesn't, when people wrong him, he turns the other cheek. He prays for those who persecute him. He does not show his greatness in wealth or in temples or in wives. He shows his greatness through his sacrificial love. He shows his greatness through giving up his own rights. He shows his greatness through dying a horrific death on the cross for you and me, and in conquering death for you, for me. He shows his greatness in coming to those who have rejected him and seeking us out, coming after us, loving us when we don't even deserve it, when we don't even love him. But make no mistake, he is still king. He is fearful and powerful, and he can do whatever he wants. The only reason I can surrender my life to Jesus is not because I'm not afraid. It's because I trust him, because he's already surrendered his life for me. So I want to finish today with an exercise. So wherever you're at today, I know this is one of those weird things where we have in-person and those watching at home. Wherever you're at today and wherever you're at in your walk with God today, whether you're brand new in the midst of having your assumptions shattered, in the midst of crisis, or whether you're deep into your journey, you're already on the other side of that, I want to invite you to try this. And that's all this is. It's an invitation. So if it gets too weird for you, just feel free to set this aside until you're fully ready. But here's what I want you to do. Close your eyes. And I want you to imagine right now a safe place. And I don't want to define that to you, but it's something that is safe to you at home, outside, wherever you want that to be. But I want you to enter into that and touch it, feel it, smell it. Now there, I want you to imagine Jesus enters into that space with you. He looks you full in the face. He knows everything about you. He knows things that you don't even know about yourself. He knows who you really are and what you really want. He knows your past. He knows your wounds. He knows why you respond to things the way you do and why you seek the things you do. He knows. And he loves you with a love that you cannot even grasp or make sense of. Now I want you to sit there and don't hide. Don't defend yourself. And don't try to stop your questions. Let them pour out. Don't cover over your past hurt. And when you're ready, ask him to show you what he wants you to see in the undercurrents and the depths of your soul. Your heart is deep, deep waters. You don't even know what's down there. But a man of wisdom can help draw them out. Where are my desires leading me? What desires are directing my life? Are they different than what I say I want? I'm going to give you 2 minutes to just sit with him, and then I'll come back and close this in communion.